Good morning, everybody. I'm Chloe Tetro. I'm the head coach here with Ready Care. And today, on this gorgeous rainy Thursday morning, we are going to have a look at value driven choice making, what's involved with it, what that means for you with regards if you've ever found yourself in a position where you're unsure whether you're making the correct decision for yourself, and kind of on a longer trajectory. If the choices that you're making are fully aligned with who you are, what you want, it's a nice little look under the lid to see what really drives our choices, what differentiates a good choice for me versus a bad choice for me. And really looking at values in a more detailed fashion to understand not just their role in choice, but touching a little bit on their role in motivation. The two are very, very intrinsically linked. And lastly, we'll just follow up with a little bit of a practical application on how to identify your own core values and see where you can bring more of those into your day-to-day life. So, value-driven choice. What is value-driven choice? What are values even? It's a word that gets kind of bandied around quite a bit that we kind of have a bit of an idea around, but basically they are the guiding principles that would shape our behavior in and around our decision making. They represent what we would deem important in life from a psychological standpoint, and with regards to the neuroscience aspect of it, it kind of extends our understanding of explaining the brain's role in how it values principles. Research at the moment really indicates that the prefrontal cortex, the one that gets brought up all the time in these chats, because it's involved in so much of our decision making, so much of our ability to weigh up options. So the prefrontal cortex is heavily involved in evaluating your choices and the outcomes, but it's based on those personal values. It's based on, it's not just a cold Spock like logical, cold looking at two decisions very, very logically. It bases decisions very largely on the emotional drivers that would be based around the personal value system. And that emotional charge that comes with personal values is really, really crucial to strengthen commitment to value-driven behavior. And what's important there is a lot of people I chat to over the weeks and months and years talk about willpower, they talk about commitment, motivation, drive. All of these things are very, very much nestled in how you are aware of your values and how you can harness them towards actions and behaviors that you undertake. So let's have a look at the formation of values. And if there's ever questions or anything like that, pop them into the comment section. I love to get them. So what's involved in the formation? How do these values evolve? So we have to look at the kind of intricacy between neurobiology, a person's individual experiences, and the social environment that shapes them. So values will take root in the neural architecture aspect of it, where the brain actually encodes what we hold important through the regions responsible for emotional responses and rational thoughts. So limbic system, like we mentioned, prefrontal cortex, like we mentioned. As we get older, we start to look at our situations, and when we begin our life, we have so many options of synaptic pathways. And as we get older, something called synaptic pruning starts to happen. So similar to flowers, what happens is we start to lessen our options. We start to go, okay, these things seem to be, these actions seem to be more important than others. These types of behaviors seem to bring me pleasure or reward or, love or things that feed me. Whereas these types, I don't really like how that's going. So intrinsically, what starts to happen there in the developing child is that they start to attribute particular importance and particular value to specific behaviors. That's very, very in keeping with, how somebody was raised, their own environment, but also their personality, their traits, things that are louder in them than might be in their sibling. George Moll and his colleagues have a paper called The Neuroscience of Values, a Cognitive Neuroscience Perspective. And it looks at the valuation system of the brain. So how the brain creates value, and how it integrates information from our interactions in the world, shaping what we will cherish and value versus what we deem not necessarily important. So that's synaptic pruning I was talking about. Neurobiological processes will start to will start to create values by linking emotional significance to our thoughts and our judgments, often through reinforcement. So, what that basically means is, let's say, I really value freedom. I love it. So, when I was younger and throughout my life, situations where I had lots of freedom elicited good emotional response in me. So, what happens there is the hippocampus, the area that's responsible for memory, it will start to store these memories along with the limbic system, and they'll say, okay, these memories give me that emotional response. This is a good thing. We're happy with that. That's important to us. We value that. So as experiences come into my life that remind me in my memory center of times that I experienced freedom and was happy, it is more likely to start to move towards those types of choices. It's more likely to recognize situations and contexts and environments where I am most likely to replicate good emotion. So our values, they're not static. They're dynamic, like the brain. Neuroplasticity is something I chat about quite often. It's the brain's ability to reorganize, readapt based on lots of different choices of what becomes important to us at any given time. It can change our values. Things that are important to us in our 20s, for example, might not be important to us in our 30s or 40s. There are variations that can happen, and it's important that we check in with ourselves each time so that we're not operating from outdated patterning. So if we're very, very aware that in our 20s and early teens, early 20s, for example, status is very important. And lots of younger people can make decisions based on status. Will this make me look good within my group, community, or family? Will this job give me more status? And choices can be carved that bring closer to status. But as that person grows into their 30s, they might realize that that's not really giving them that level of satisfaction that it previously did, and into their 40s and maybe even into their 50s. And what's happened there is they've self-identified with understanding that status was important to them at a particular given point. And rather than check in with themselves again, even every 5 years, even every 5 years, to see, is that really important to me? Have my values changed? Is family more important to me than it previously would have been in my teens? Usually it is. Usually it is. As people get older, it tends to become a stronger value. So operating from outdated beliefs that influence choices can lead an individual to make choices that they themselves have to, fall with the repercussions of, and they can find themselves living quite out of sync and out of line with what inherently feeds them, inherently drives them, inherently makes them feel motivated. So oftentimes how that can show up in our lives, and I think we've all been there at a particular point, is that we go like was it the Talking Heads? How did I get here? This is not my beautiful house. That you kind of find yourself going, how did I land in this situation where I don't feel personally connected to specific aspects of my life? I feel quite empty. Empty is something that would come up quite a bit, is when we find ourselves surrounded by choices that do not feed our inherent sense of important value and worth. As I said, they're very intrinsically linked to willpower, motivation, drive. So our drive, willpower, and motivation can go down hugely. So it's very, very, very important to check in as often as you can, but every once in a while, as good spiritual hygiene or good psychological hygiene, check on how well you recognize your own values in the here and now. Not what was important to you 5 years ago, what's important to you right now. They can vary, but I will say that as people grow through life and their personality is fairly, we can change as we go, but we have a fairly self-contained idea of who we are. Specific values, what are called core values, the most important ones, tend to stay fairly locked in. And those are the ones to really, really, really hone in on. The ones that are very, very deep to the core, as the name would suggest. They are the ones that will actually give you the most satisfaction, the more you can bring them into your life, even in small amounts. Let's have a look at how that impacts choice. So they will act as a compass. If you think of them as like the North Star and the prefrontal cortex as the navigator, that's quite a pie in the sky kind of way of looking at it. But they should be your driving directives. They'll be the pattern for behavior decision making. They'll steer through all of the different life choices and influencing your path towards either fulfillment and well-being or feeling a little bit out of sorts, out of alignment, etc. So the prefrontal cortex, as I mentioned, and particularly what's called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, it'll play the most pivotal role in the process by integrating cognitive and emotional information, as we said, to assess the personal significance of different actions. When individuals make decisions aligned with their core values, the ones that we mentioned, the kind of deep, heavy set, very in there, they will report a greater sense of satisfaction and well-being. And there's lots of different studies out there that look at what are good predicators for life satisfaction, which I would say is a very important thing to try to aim for. Purpose, which we'll touch on next week, and value-driven behaviors are the big ones there. They're very, very big. So when we look, let's place it in the material realm a little bit, because it's going into the ephemeral land quite a bit now for today. When you look at a corporate lawyer who values social contribution over financial gain, when they decide to leave a very high status or high paying job to start to work for a nonprofit organization, they're using their prefrontal cortex to evaluate the capabilities to weigh options up against personal values. So even though there's a pay cut and you could, that individual could get social pressure, poor advice that may muddle that choice, the alignment with their values leads to absolutely increased happiness, sense of purpose, and life satisfaction, which is hugely, hugely important. For those that are interested in this a little bit more, there's a paper called Personal Values and Brain Value Representations by someone called Berkman, Berkman. And that really gives an in-depth look at how personal values are represented in the brain and their influence on the behavior that comes with it. That particular research, and there's a host of research out there. There's great TED Talks, there's great books out there. There's one that I'll recommend further down, which actually I think is one of my favorite books on personal growth in inverted commas. All of this research really underscores the importance of understanding our values, not just as these abstract, nice to have concepts, but as really fundamental neurobiological guides that are a blueprint. They're a practical, systematic blueprint to lead to more fulfilling life choices. They are not just this kind of abstract notion. They are absolutely central to decision-making processes. Now, I do understand that sometimes we're faced with decisions that we can't, I might want to bring as much freedom in my life as possible, but for certain things, death and taxes, it's not going to happen. There's a degree of the parameters of how much we can bring those into our lives for particular choices. And I do understand that. But as much as we can, and even from doing personal life coaching with individuals over the years, it's that tiniest change that really, really makes a difference in somebody's life. If they really value autonomy, no, I'm kind of circling around the same ones here. If they really value, let's say, tranquility, right? Peace, tranquility, it's at really their core. And they found themselves in environments where that's really not there. Moving the needle just 1% in their behaviors and habits for that week to bring in more of it. And you look at the different segments of your life, you look at work, family, home, relationships, anything, hobbies, and you say, how can I bring in 1% more tranquility into all of these facets? It will have a massive, massive impact in your quality of life. Absolutely, definitely. In practical terms, again, it's for example, for someone who values health and well-being, they might derive much, much greater satisfaction from simple minimalistic lifestyle where they get to make room for health, well-being, having a stock of the things in their rooms, things that are, quite simplistic. There's another book now. This is not this is not my favorite one. This is another one. Mark Lebar's book, The Value of Living Well, and it kind of looks at a more philosophical approach to this subject. And you can see the interplay with it. That it's neurobiological, it's systematic, it's psychological, emotional, but also there is a more philosophical, spiritual aspect to this. He argues that living a good life is intrinsically linked with this pursuit of values. And it's not a one-time event. It is something that needs to be looked at, taken stock of as you progress. I would say if you try to do this even once every 6 months, it's going to have a massive, massive impact. And it's not just for yourself. So Maslow, for those familiar with his work, is person-centered humanistic psychotherapist, and he's best known for his hierarchy of needs. So he would be one of the kind of pioneering psychologists in humanistic and what's called transpersonal psychology. And transpersonal psychology means what's good for me is good for the larger population, is good for many others. And there's this kind of positive domino effect where when you really look after what makes you perform, shine, and be your best, it has a very positive impact on your community. He looked at what's called the hierarchy of needs, and lots of people will be familiar with this in a kind of office managerial setting. It's when we take care of things like security, safety first, then, food, psychological needs, emotional needs, then it becomes more abstract, but more foundational to our experience of life as more fulfilling. And at the top of these things would be leading a value-driven life. What happens once individuals are able to foster that sense of fulfillment and knowing that they are behaving in ways that not only fulfill them and what drives them, but they're able to altruistically utilize their own capabilities of action behaviors towards their values to help the community at large, it creates the greatest sense of fulfillment that an individual can have. And that's big bucks. That's very important. That's very meaningful. And as I said at the start, leading value-driven behaviors and a sense of purpose, both together, lead to the greatest amount of happiness and fulfillment that a person can experience in their life. So let's get back to real world applications of these. Do you know your values? Do you know what values are? And lots of people don't. As I said, it becomes quite a poetic, ephemeral term. But what you can do is, firstly, Google search. That's how I actually came across mine in a more systematic way, where I was like, no, I'm properly going to deep dive into this and have a look at what are my values. So I thought, what is a value versus not a value? So you can get these brilliantly intricate lists of values on a Google search, and have a look through them and try to maybe pick out 10 that resonate with you. Then whittle it down to maybe 6, then whittle it down to 4. You can keep whittling if you want, but you'll get a greater scope of idea of the actual things that you can aim to have more of in your life that scientifically will create more fulfillment, satisfaction, and well-being. Another way to kind of, if you're faced with the list and you're still kind of going, oh, Chloe, I'm not too sure, reflect on peak experiences, moments in your life where you felt really, really happy, fulfilled, proud. These would be known as peak experiences, where you felt, that greater sense of feeling more alive than usual. Ask yourself what was happening during these times and why these moments stood out. The themes, and that's essentially what we're looking for. We're looking to extract themes that emerge from reflections like this. will point directly at your core values. And you can do it in flip it around. What frustrates you? What makes you sad? What makes you irritated? So if you sit with those things and go, I'll give you a real world example from me as well. I really don't like when people are rude and disrespectful and nasty. It really bothers me, to the point that it probably bothers me way more than it should. I know it definitely bothers me more than it bothers some people that I know. So I know that that's something quite particular to me. So why does that bother me? It bothers me because kindness is one of my core values. Kindness, understanding, caring, all of these bundled together, let's call them one, let's call them understanding. That's a real core value of me. So when that's disrespected, it bothers me way more than somebody else. Or exceedingly rigid structures on time, structures on my own personal freedom, as I've mentioned. That shows me that freedom and autonomy, they're very, very important to me. So already there, I've looked at, what bothers me, what frustrates me, what irritates me, and I flipped it to go, okay, I know because I'm bothered by these things, that the reverse of that is a core value of mine. When that's been impeached on, stepped on, when it's been stepped on, and looking at peak experiences, what happened in those times that made me feel that way. What are the themes that emerge from that? Particular role models sometimes, people you admire, whether it be sports people, family members, leaders in community. Are there particular attributes that you find you want to emanate? Good leadership skills, these types of things. And identifying particular moments of choice. Are there moments in your life that are beyond your everyday choices? Beyond your, am I going to have eggs and bacon or Greek yogurt this morning? Moments that you feel were significant, that you made a choice that you're happy with. What were the factors that you considered and that you listened to internally that guided that choice? That particular scenario will oftentimes tell you what are some of your values. And then what I would say to you guys is, once you have identified them, write them somewhere you can see them. Some people like to create what's called a mission statement, and it's basically a sentence that encapsulates 2 or 3 of those. 3 is a good number. Further than that is nice to have, but it can get a bit complicated to try juggle all of those at once. If you can whittle it down to 3 and try to make a sentence for yourself, that is what's called a mission statement. So something you endeavor to do that would hold these qualities in them. So I want to lead a purpose, value life for myself, where I approach situations with kindness, where I approach situations with understanding, and try to carve as much autonomy and freedom for myself. Some kind of a more eloquent version of that, and have it somewhere that you can see it. Because if you can see it, when you're faced with decisions, whether it be career, family, and sometimes it can be even in your reaction and behavior towards something, take a step back and go, am I acting in a way that aligns with how I want to show up in my life? Am I acting in a way that aligns with my values? If you can see it, it's going to start to enter your subconscious a lot easier, and it'll be a lot easier for you to spot opportunities to bring more of those things into your life. And ask yourself, if you're feeling self-reflective that day, how much of these are actually showing up in my life at the moment? You can really surprise yourself, while saying, that was a huge point for myself, is when I found myself in like a scenario that I described to you guys earlier, kind of going, how did I get here? In previous life, where actually what was wrong is I had found myself in scenarios where I had made no room for autonomy, no room for freedom. I was feeling exceedingly trapped. And because freedom and autonomy are things that bring me fulfillment and happiness, I found myself terribly unfulfilled and terribly unhappy. And the momentary change was going, oh, I've made no room for something that's exceedingly important to me. So ask yourself, how are these values showing up? What room are you giving them in your life? Could there be more opportunities for these to show up? And be open to, these changing as you go along your life. But that's it, really. That's my whirlwind tour of values. I hope you guys enjoyed that and have a greater sense of how identifying these can really, really help create better choices for yourself, can help with your decision-making process, can bring you towards a more fulfilled sense of purposeful life. And next week, we'll actually do a bit more of a deep dive into what is actually meant by purpose. Because again, these terms, although I see them as quite, neurobiological, systematic, and even psychological terms, they can sometimes kind of waver around in the abstract, and we need to kind of bring them back to, what does that mean for me? How can I bring these into my life to actually get something fulfilling out of it? So thanks a million for watching, guys. If you've any questions and comments, please do feel free to use the comment section. I always appreciate them. Otherwise, have a lovely day. Take a minute today if you want to, just to reflect. Bring up an old Google search for yourself of different values and assign yourself the task of, are these showing up for me? Make a little list, see them every day. I promise it'll make a difference. Thanks, guys. Have a lovely rest of your day. And Andrew will be back. No, I'm back next week talking about purpose. And Andrew will be back the week after. Right, that's me for today, guys. Bye now.